From hikers to campers, a number of individuals have vanished under unusual circumstances within the UK's national park system and remote forest areas. These are cases that are either strange for one reason or another, or were ultimately never solved, or where people felt that the explanation provided was not particularly thorough or complete and may not paint the whole picture. Most missing people in the UK are found and in a timely manner, but these are the exception to the rule. Let's start in the North York Moors National Park, which is a place with some of the most breathtaking landscapes in England. It is around 554 square miles of rolling hills, boggy valleys and dense forests that stretch for miles. Around 9 million people visit this park every year, and most come and go without a problem. Despite its beauty though, it can be a very unforgiving place for the unprepared. In late 2015, it became the place that 38-year-old Kieran Chapman would come to vanish. However, to many, this was not simply a story surrounding a man that was unprepared and got lost in a wilderness area. Rather, it is the story of an unusual disappearance that contains unanswered questions, odd circumstances, and a lingering sense that not everything was thoroughly understood. On the 13th of December 2015, the Scarborough News reported, "The brother of an intelligent and adventurous Scarborough man who went missing after going hiking in the North York Moors said today his family was extremely anxious about his disappearance." Kieran was an avid hiker who had set out for a long day hiking trip in the park in late November of that year, starting at Harwood Dale Forest. After Kieran failed to return home from his hike, his family members contacted the police, and just a few days later, on the 2nd of December, his car was found. And sure enough, it was on a remote road within the forest. It's not unusual to park in these areas, and hikers and dog walkers use them before heading out onto the forest trails. The discovery of the car was not without its oddities though. Kieran's phone was found lying abandoned on the bonnet of the car, and investigators had no idea why he'd left it there. This has always been an aspect of the disappearance that has left people somewhat divided. There are those that think he just put the phone down and forgot it somehow, and others who think it is a sign of a disturbance or panic or something along those lines that caused Kieran to want to leave the area with some haste. Because he quite literally disappeared during this trip, I can see why many feel this way. Of course, everything surrounding the phone is very speculative, though people that knew him said that both him leaving the phone there and just disappearing without telling anyone was completely out of character. Before we go any further, if I could just ask you to like the video and hype it, then I'll be very grateful. And please consider turning on notifications for the channel and subscribing if you haven't already. After an unsuccessful search by authorities, the Scarborough and Rydale Mountain Rescue Team were called in to comb the forest and the rest of the national park. The search failed to locate even a single trace of Kieran or his whereabouts and was stood down 3 days after it began, citing a total lack of clues or evidence of his presence. One issue that the family faced was that the police began to suspect that Kieran might have set off in the first place with the intention of not coming back. Kieran's brother swiftly disputed this though, and he told the Yorkshire Post, "It was fairly obvious to us that the police suspected Kieran had disappeared on purpose despite our protest that, despite being somewhat of a loner, he was level-headed, happy, and about as far away from that as you might imagine. Nothing has been found to suggest that this was actually the case, despite a police search of Kieran's property in Scarborough. Kieran is a keen hiker. We strongly believe this was the reason he was in Harwood Dale. We also believe that he would never leave his car unattended for more than one night. We believe that he embarked upon an all-day hike and something untoward happened." It's interesting that for the police, Kieran being a bit of a loner was enough for some reason to believe that he purposefully disappeared, despite going through his belongings, including the phone, and not being able to find any evidence or anything alluding to that being the case whatsoever. Just to be clear, absolutely nothing at all pointed towards that, and yet they were almost insisting that it was probably the case. I mean, good actual lord, I have a small circle of friends too, and I don't just plan to vanish into thin air. It's wild to me that they came to that conclusion based on literally nothing. All they really had was the fact that they couldn't find him. It reminds me of Nicola Bulley's disappearance a little bit in that sense, where authorities basically insinuated that she vanished because of menopause. It was such an inappropriate comment to make, and frustrating that they were willing to jump to such conclusions based on very little, I'll leave a link to my coverage of Nicola in the top right now, and in the description if you want to open a new tab to hear about it. It was a very odd case in all fairness. Anyway, Kieran's family essentially said that he was steady, content, enjoying life, and absolutely loved hiking in that national park. To them, it was rather clear that he had gone for a hike, and somewhere along the way, something happened to him, or had gone wrong. Perhaps an accident, or some kind of medical incident. Inspector Graham Hinman of the North Yorkshire Police essentially made the point that they, in tandem with professional search teams, had combed a wide area surrounding his last known position numerous times. He said that during those searches, the weather worsened and they were facing rather harsh terrain along with heavy rain and winds, and they could find no evidence of him whatsoever. They didn't find any footprints to indicate a direction of travel, nor did they find any clothing or abandoned equipment or anything like that, aside from the phone on the car. Authorities had helicopters in the air, fitted with thermal imaging cameras. They had search dogs on the ground, among many searches. Despite their efforts, at no point was a heat signature picked up anywhere, and the dogs never found a scent either. 5 months later, on the 3rd of May 2016, a couple were out walking their dog at Howard Forest. They watched as their dog ran off ahead of them, and they could see him sniffing what they thought was a pile of clothing. This was in fact not just clothing, but was Kieran's body. On his person, he had a backpack and a digital camera with photos of the park and himself on it. The camera suggested that he had in fact been treating the day as an outing to hike, just as the family stated in the first place. And it appeared as though he had just been documenting his travels and surroundings in the park. His body was found within Howard Dale, about 2 kilometres away from the car and well within the search radius. This area was searched numerous times by many people, including professional search dog teams, and they never found him. This raised many uncomfortable questions for the authorities, with people asking how so many trained personnel, aided by helicopters and search dogs, failed to locate him, in an area that they'd combed through numerous times. People were basically criticising the police, stating that they'd done a terrible job, and also wasted too much time on the idea that Kieran purposefully wanted to disappear, and that they latched onto that idea so strongly despite the lack of evidence. The pathologist, Peter Nigel Cooper, said that the body had no injuries whatsoever, and no evidence to suggest a natural disease was the cause. Peter said that it appeared as though Kieran had been using some banned substances, but only in small quantities, and not in an amount that would have caused him to pass away, and he ruled that out. He ended by saying, "I do not have a definite explanation, but there is a probability that he passed away from hypothermia." That's an interesting statement, because usually pathologists like to be very clear, but in this instance he was essentially saying that he didn't know why this happened, but that hypothermia was a likely culprit. Be that as it may, it's still not really clear as to what the suggestion is as to what happened. Did he get lost, become exhausted, and was eventually overcome by the elements? He's been in this area plenty of times, so getting lost is difficult to imagine, though not impossible. Perhaps he had a medical incident that wasn't so obvious that stopped him in his tracks. As far as the coroner's report goes, there wasn't anything obvious to point at that, and as said, no injuries were present either. It's interesting for another reason too, because if this was solely a case of hypothermia, it seems that you might have expected the dogs to have found him during the search, since he would have been stationary for the entire time. It seems that foul play is difficult to argue, since he hadn't sustained any injuries. There's clearly a piece of missing information here that really prevents a full understanding. Kieran's disappearance was odd and completely out of character, as mentioned by his brother, and has left behind some questions. Why did he leave the phone on the bonnet of the car? Was this just simply an accident, or was it indicative of something else happening, such as a medical event, or perhaps confusion from this substance he'd taken, despite the fact that the coroner said that the amount was very low? The search was described as being an extensive effort, yet failed to find him despite being right on top of him essentially. It also seems that ending the search after just 3 days might have also been a bit premature. It seems particularly unfortunate that it ended so abruptly, because if it had gone on for a little longer, they might have found him. Assuming that he hadn't been placed there after the fact, which some people had speculated. Though again, because he hadn't sustained any injuries, ideas surrounding foul play seem somewhat unlikely to me. Kieran's disappearance is a case that does have an ending, but not much closure, since it's not clear what actually happened during his final hike. Let's now move on to the Eryri National Park in Wales. It is around 823 square miles of towering mountains, lakes, rugged coastlines and forests that stretch for miles. Around 4 million people visit this place annually. It is also the home of two separate disappearances that really should have nothing to do with one another, but they come to share some very strange coincidences nonetheless. Two unrelated hikers, Shane Colico and David Brookfield, met similar fates in the park, separated by 12 years. Shane was born in 1979 and grew up in Stoke-on-Trent in England. By his early 30s, he had built a promising career as a psychiatrist and would help patients with all kinds of different problems. People that knew him described him as intelligent, dedicated and enthusiastic about life. He had recently secured a new job and he was said to be very excited about it. There were no indicators of personal problems, and there were no reasons or evidence to suggest that he intended to disappear. Rather, Shane was an avid outdoors enthusiast, particularly fond of hiking in the wilder regions of the UK. He was experienced in solo hiking and understood the need to prepare in advance for these trips with supplies and proper gear. In the days leading up to the 4th of August 2012, Shane planned a day hike in the Carnarthai mountain range, a popular but challenging area in North Wales, known for its rugged peaks and unpredictable weather. He drove from Stoke in his Fiat Seicento, a small car that would later become a key clue in the search effort. He parked near Ogwyn Cottage, which is a common trailhead for hikers. Shane did the right thing and made people aware of his plans beforehand so people would know whereabouts he would be around the mountains. He aimed for this summit that I think is pronounced Penir Oldwen, which is around a 3,200 foot or 980 metre summit. As said, Shane was prepared and was properly equipped for the outing. He had appropriate hiking gear and carried the essentials for the solo trip. On the 4th of August that year, a Saturday, Shane set out alone under clear skies, embarking on what should have been, for him, a relatively simple hike through the mountains. However, on that day, he vanished without a trace while in the national park. Authorities really had no idea what happened to him. He hadn't made any distress calls, and despite making public appeals, nobody came forth to say that they'd seen him in the area at any point. When Shane didn't contact his family or return home, he was reported missing the day afterwards on the 5th. Local authorities, in coordination with outside police resources and mountain rescue teams, launched a full-scale and intensive search operation to locate him and bring him home. The mountain rescue teams, alongside helicopters, search dogs and volunteers, scoured the area looking for anything at all that might help to explain where he went. As mentioned, he had made people aware of his plans and where he was going. When searchers found his parked car, they also found his written plans detailing where he planned to go. This was good news, so the searchers thought, as it gave them a place to begin, and they were hoping to find something that would point them in the right direction, whether that was disturbed ground to indicate a fall, or perhaps footprints that might provide a specific place to look. When none of these efforts worked, an emphasis was placed on the search dogs, but they just never once found a scent anywhere. Because all efforts were coming up empty-handed, the search leaders described it as looking for a needle in a haystack. Instead of an active, ongoing search effort, authorities asked anyone who might be hiking in the area to keep their eyes open and to report to them if they saw or noticed anything odd, such as abandoned clothing or gear, but nothing came of this. Over the next 6 years, the case remained open, and it seemed that authorities wanted to rule out the idea that Shane had perhaps purposely left to start a new life or something like that, because it was only in 2018 that it was made official that in all likelihood he had passed away somewhere in the national park, though how and why that came to pass was not known. As Shane's case gathered dust essentially, with no new clues or leads, life continued for the family, and they unfortunately had to wrestle with the fact that they couldn't have any closure at that time. Elsewhere, and many years later, there was David Brookfield, born in 1959 in Lancashire. At 65 years old, during the time of this incident, he was a devoted family man. He was a husband, a father, a grandfather, and even a great-grandfather. He worked as a transport and warehouse manager for a housing trust. Like Shane, outside of his work, he was also known for his love of the outdoors. David, perhaps obviously so, had good managerial skills, and he led and organised hiking groups and had hiked in the Eryri National Park numerous times before. He came to retire in 2023, and to keep himself busy and active, he wanted to lean into hiking and just being in the outdoors. David was very fit for his age, experienced and cautious. Like Shane actually, David knew how important it was to check in and share his routes with family so people had an idea of where he would be. On the 8th of January 2024, David planned a short warm-up hike to Llynedwall in the nearby Glyderau Mountains before his more intensive hike the day afterwards. David managed this with no issues and was confident for the day ahead. Celebrating his first full week of retirement, he drove about 100 miles to get to the mountain. He planned a 15km or a roughly 9-mile solo route covering Penyrolwen and Carneth Lewin peaks that he knew well from prior visits. Dressed in a bright blue waterproof jacket, black trousers, and carrying a large backpack with supplies, he set off in good weather, though forecasts warned that the weather would likely worsen. It was forecast to rain and possibly snow with heavier winds. Around lunchtime, he sent a text to his wife from the summit of Carneth Lewin. While we don't know the exact wording, he essentially said that he'd conquered the mountain and that he was preparing to descend. He should have been back home that evening, and when he wasn't, his family alerted the authorities. Similar to what happened with Shane all those years prior, the now Chief Inspector, John Aspinall, took charge and mobilised a multi-agency response. They had Coast Guard helicopters in the air, drones were out, search dogs too, and of course, many volunteers. Unfortunately, during the search effort, harsh winter weather, including heavy snow and high winds, hampered the effort throughout. By late January, they had found nothing, and this must have been very reminiscent of what happened those 12 years prior for the county and everyone that had been involved back then. For them, there must have been a strong sense of déjà vu. There was a breakthrough in the case in May, 4 months after he vanished, when a Coast Guard helicopter spotted a blue jacket in a steep gully on the mountain. This was in fact David's, and they managed to locate his body quickly after that. However, that wasn't all that they discovered. Around 5 metres away, ground searchers spotted another jacket, though it was older and clearly worn out by the weather at this point. A brief search ensued on foot, but they weren't able to find anything more right then and there. After calling in the find, that gully saw specialised drones flying up and down it, and one of these drones spotted some more fabric under some brush. It was in fact Shane's body, and this was in very short proximity to David. Shane was unfortunately very well hidden by undergrowth, and that's why the searchers couldn't locate him when they found David. The drones that they used were specialised somehow for this task, though I'm not sure how, but they did manage to spot him. David had been wearing a smart Garmin fitness watch, and they were able to use it to track his movements all the way to the summit. But then, for some reason, perhaps a little oddly, there was no data from that point onwards. It had just stopped recording for some reason after reaching the top. I'm not really sure why it would just stop recording his location data at that moment, but it did not show his travel down into the gully. Perhaps the battery was running low, or perhaps it malfunctioned or something like that. But I suppose at the time David's body was discovered, it was probably too late to figure that out. Sergeant Terry, who assisted in the search, said that the circumstances were exceptional. I can see what he was saying. Being found in the exact same place, quite literally just a few metres apart, is such a wild coincidence. It is important to state that the coroner essentially ruled both disappearances as an accidental fall. No foul play was suspected, and it was essentially made clear that the area would have been rather slippery at the time that David likely fell, which obviously will have been seen as a contributing factor to the fall. Now, after having explored the Eryri National Park, let's now turn to the Lake District National Park, which is a little closer to me because this is a place I tend to visit every couple of years to stay and go hiking with family. After getting married, this was the first place my wife and I went to, and so we know the area fairly well. The first time I went to the Lake District, I learned about Tom McMorrow, a 26-year-old resident of Penrith, which is just 11 miles away from where he would come to vanish. Tom was born in 1987, and he came from a good, supportive family. He was described as bright, personable, and an adventurous young man. He excelled academically, leaving schooling with very good GCSE and A-level grades, and initially had planned to pursue medical school. Instead, he studied pharmacy at Manchester University, before realising that might not be for him. At some point along the way, he discovered that he had a love for cooking, and he shifted his careers to become a chef at the George Hotel in his hometown. Like everyone else we've spoken about today, his outdoor skills were notable too. He held a Duke of Edinburgh Silver Award, which is awarded after completing a youth achievement programme here in the UK. It was put together to encourage young people to develop various skills and independence. Some of those skills involved cooking, which might have been where he picked up his love for the culinary field. But the programme also put a particular emphasis on expedition, as in planning out and training for self-sufficient trips, which puts a focus on hiking and camping. In any case, Tom was also a very strong swimmer and held a water lifesaver qualification, alongside having completed St John's first aid courses. Tom was a very competent young man, and these attributes of his made his disappearance particularly puzzling, especially since he was intensely familiar with the Lake District's terrain and also obviously had a lot of confidence in the water. The sequence of events unfolded on the evening of the 5th of January 2014, when Tom attended a work party celebrating the festivities that had just passed, and now the new year. This party was situated at the very appropriately named Inn on the Lake Hotel in Glenridding, which is situated right on the shores of Ullswater Lake, which I have walked past many times and crossed on boat to hike the surrounding trails. He arrived in good spirits and mingled with his colleagues and friends, and appeared to be enjoying himself without any signs of distress or unusual behaviour. Rather, he was a very social person and by all accounts was having a good time at the party. The last confirmed sighting of Tom happened at around 10:15 PM after he seemingly departed, with some believing he intended to head back home to Penrith. However, for some reason, Tom failed to return home that night and also had not contacted anyone. In the early hours of the 6th, this triggered alarm bells for his family, who promptly reported this to the authorities, which would initiate the investigation into his very strange and sudden disappearance. Because he had gone missing from a hotel that was situated right next to the lake, authorities deployed underwater search teams to scan the pier and the shoreline. This might seem like a rather obvious decision, but people saw him leave the hotel heading away from the lake. Although since he quite literally just vanished into thin air with no clues appearing anywhere, this was as good a place to start as any. While the diving teams were in the water, mountain rescue teams began to search the surrounding trails, while others headed into all outbuildings to see if they could find any evidence of his presence. Unfortunately, right after his disappearance and during the search, the weather worsened, which made things even more difficult. There was a very large effort made by the authorities and Tom's family to get his case into the public eye, both via the press and social media. They needed help because after he left the hotel, there was no further trace of him at all. He wasn't picked up on any cameras anywhere, and the trail largely just went cold. Everyone was interviewed who was at the party, and nobody had seen him after he left. It's important to clarify that everyone that knew Tom frequently described the disappearance as out of character. Liam, who was one of Tom's friends, said, "He was having a good time and loved to socialise. The last people really remember was him dancing." Police checked phone records, which were not helpful. The last time Tom used his phone was around 2 hours before he vanished and was still at the party inside the hotel. Tom's bank account and other personal belongings were examined by the police, but everything had just been left untouched. Liam said with some confidence, "To us, it is pretty clear he has not gone anywhere," indicating that Tom's co-workers believed that he must still be in the area as no one saw him leave Glenridding. On the night of Tom's disappearance, there was a brief sighting of someone who matched Tom's description on a nearby path leading to Lake Ullswater's steamer pier, which led police to suspect he may have fallen into the water. However, despite an intensive search both in the water and on the land, Tom, nor any trace of him, has ever been found. Inspector David Willits of Cumbria Police said this: "There has been a lot of effort and time put in by different people in the constabulary and other services such as the mountain rescue teams to find Thomas. We are continuing to make inquiries in the hope of returning him to his family. I am grateful to Ullswater Launch Company for assisting regular officers who continue to go to the Ullswater area to look for Thomas. Both the mountain rescue and the underwater search teams conduct regular training in this area to improve the chances of finding Thomas. So far, we have recorded over 300 separate actions when looking for Thomas, and we will continue to put that effort in until he is found. The intensive search effort lasted for about a week and began to wind down on the 14th of January, though Tom's family was not going to abandon hope. Instead, his family and friends began to dive along the Ullswater shores themselves, but found nothing. In fact, even all this time afterwards, not a single clue has ever surfaced that might help to explain what happened to him or where he went. Thorough searches of the lake produced nothing, and the general wisdom of the people in the area seemed to be that if Tom had fallen in, then at some point his body would have washed up along one of the shores. But obviously that never happened. No definitive ideas have ever been confirmed or shared by the authorities, largely because they just don't know, I suppose. Though people have obviously speculated that he might have accidentally fallen into the lake. If that was Tom who was spotted on the pier, then it would have been dark and potentially slippery. He was a very strong swimmer, so that might count against the idea, although if the water was particularly cold, which it would have been, becoming suddenly submersed like that would likely be a very difficult situation to recover from and get out. If that was the case, he would have been intensely shocked and just stunned by the cold. In fact, in those conditions, the body naturally wants to take in a deep breath, and if that makes said person take in that cold water, then that's just not a great situation to be in and would likely end badly. Of course, other people have speculated about foul play too, but there has never been any evidence to point towards that. I suppose that would have either looked like being pushed from the pier or being removed from the area entirely. Though again, none of this is very clear and it remains unexplained. With that brings us to the end of this. I am aware of other disappearances based in the UK too, so if you want me to keep going with this and cover more, then do let me know. Please do remember to subscribe and turn on notifications for the channel, and also to like the video and hype it if you can. I'd appreciate that very much. Or a dislike if you disliked it. I'm happy to hear your honest opinion either way. I'd just like to thank you for watching, and a really big thank you to the patrons. Have a great week, and be safe all. Peace.